Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 26 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the New York Islanders, in which the Sharks have won 5-4 in overtime. And so for the second straight game, the Sharks have put out a very entertaining product on the ice, a very fun game to watch for sure. And while this may not hit on all the same exact marks as the Rangers game from a couple of days ago, primarily because the Sharks would end up coming out on top in this one, thus generating 2 points in the standings, this is still, at least in my opinion, a much preferred outcome to the 10-1 or 10-2 losses that the Sharks were sustaining this time last month. And so jumping into this game immediately, to start this one off, in my previous review I talked about how the Sharks had been starting games off much better ever since that game against the Seattle Kraken where they were really bad to open it. And here tonight, that changed. The Sharks again had a very bad start to this one, gave up a couple of good chances to the Islanders, and eventually New York would score the first goal of the game. And this is not good for San Jose because they have yet, at least leading up to this one, they had yet to win a game when giving up the first goal. Hertl would tie it up a couple of minutes later to at 1-1, and that would be the score at the end of the first period. And the Sharks would find themselves quite lucky to be in a tie game after 20 minutes because the Islanders had multiple good chances and the Sharks did not really look good at too many points in that opening frame. In the second period, though, the Sharks would definitely improve, get some better shifts at even strength, but wouldn't manage to score a goal. Instead, the Islanders would have the only goal of the second period, that one coming on a power play to make it 2-1 New York going into the third period. And so for the second straight game, the Sharks trailing by 1 going into that final frame. And just like the New York Rangers game, the Sharks will actually fall behind by 3 goals early on, giving up one to Mike Riley shorthanded and then Ryan Pulock on the power play. In that Rangers game, we saw them bring it to within 1 goal once more with a couple of quick ones in the last few minutes and not be able to get over the hump, primarily due to the fact that the Sharks at 6-on-5 again up to this game have been doing literally nothing when given in those rare situations. Here this game, that changed quickly, as the Sharks would get to within 2 goals with a goal from Kevin Labanc, his first of the season, and with the goaltender pulled with 3 or 4 minutes left remaining, the Sharks would just look like a completely different team. They'd end up going with a 6-forward unit, so no Calen Addison here at the point, instead giving Mikael Granlund the opportunity to run it there, and he did a very good job at that point, orchestrated what was some of the best looking 6-on-5 hockey that we have seen not only this season but in recent years for the San Jose Sharks. They've really struggled in that particular area ever since they've become sort of a perennial bad team in the NHL. And so Hertl, who already had 1 goal in this game, would score not only a goal to bring it to within 1, but the game-tying goal as well, completing his hat trick here tonight. And so the Sharks would head into overtime with the game tied at 4. The Sharks had played 2 overtime games previous to this one thus far this season. Both would go through the full 5 minutes of 3-on-3 play, head to the shootout, where the Sharks would just fail there, and as such were 0-2 in post-regulation time this season. And it looked like we were going to be heading that same direction. While there were some chances back and forth as we approached the last few seconds of this one, neither team had managed to score, and it was the Sharks getting one last rush up the ice, Granlund and Eklund. It didn't seem as though much was going to happen. It's not as though it was like a 2-on-1 breakaway type of situation, but the Islanders backed off. They gave enough space for those Sharks forwards, and Eklund scores the overtime winner to secure this game for San Jose. And to revisit a point I mentioned earlier on, obviously in the grand scheme of things, the Sharks should be losing games. At the end of the day, us fans, we do want to see the Sharks win, and for that to happen, they do need to lose now in the short term to make it better in the long term. But still, as a Sharks fan, can you really look at a game in which they're trailing 4-1, score 2 goals with the goaltender pulled, and then with a last-second overtime game winner, and look at that and say, well, I'm disappointed with this outcome? Not really. This was a very fun game to watch, very exciting, and one that was at least reminiscent somewhat of the Sharks of old from a few years ago when they were never out of games. Is this something that we can expect moving forward constantly from San Jose, where they're just going to be able to score goals at will? Probably not, but the fact that it happened here tonight is definitely a positive in my books. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the top line of Eklund, Hertl, and Barabanov. They struggled in the first couple of periods of last game, but then were strong enough in the third period that made me think that they could perhaps carry that into this game against the New York Islanders. And, well, it was sort of half and half. The first period was a bit of a struggle for the line, but they definitely improved as it went on. To talk specifically about each player, Barabanov still struggles to get up to NHL speed. I thought he was definitely better here tonight than he was the other night against the New York Rangers, and he had a very nice pass that eventually led to Hertl's game-tying goal that made it 4-4, but otherwise just not consistent enough in the offensive zone to make me really happy with his assignment on this top line. I do think he'll continue to be given that chance because there really isn't any other player who belongs here, especially since the Sharks will look to keep this second line together, and so Barabanov, we'll see what happens moving forward. The other winger on this line would of course be William Eklund, who had himself a great night offensively, 3 points on the night, 2 of the assists coming with the goaltender pulled, and of course the overtime game winner. When it comes to his even strength play, I was still definitely more impressed than in the earlier parts of this road trip where I've mentioned that Eklund's offensive game had kind of lagged behind a bit, but it still wasn't super impressive, but still very nice to see that when that extra space became available due to the 3-on-3 or because of the extra man in the 6-on-5, he was able to use his immense talent to actually get some goals and assists for the San Jose Sharks. The major shining star on this top line has to be Tomas Hertl, and this is not because he manages to get a hat trick in this game. If this one finished 4-2 and those 2 Hertl goals late never actually happened, I still would have heaped a lot of praise onto Hertl, who was so much better here tonight than he was a couple of days ago against the New York Rangers. In that one, I mentioned how it was more reminiscent to early season Tomas Hertl, where he just kind of contributes an assist and mostly disappears for the rest of the game. Here tonight, he was exceptionally dominant. It felt as though every single time he stepped on the ice, he managed to hold the puck in dangerous areas along the boards, making some good passes. And while it would only amount to early on at 5-on-5 to a single goal coming from Duclair, so not even with his usual line mates, it felt as though he was deadly multiple times, and it felt as though he was also rewarded later on in this game when he does get those two very important goals to finish the hat trick for himself. So an impressive game from Hertl, who needs to show himself this season to be the best forward for the San Jose Sharks, the best player for the San Jose Sharks, and this was a very good game at proving that. When it comes then to the second line, we once again have Zetterlund, Granlund, and Duclair, and this is a very interesting second line as per usual for San Jose, because they're not exactly excelling when it comes to forechecking in the offensive zone. They don't really have that same type of skill set as a Tomas Hertl or a William Eklund, where they're good at working it along the boards and finding those openings, and Barabanov usually excels in this, even if he hasn't really been doing so in these past couple of games. When it comes to this second line, I should say, where they excel is being able to use their skill to stretch out the ice. They're not necessarily east and west players, more so they are north and south players. And so Duclair, as per usual, as it has been in these last couple of games, has been showing off his elite speed, his great talent, trying to make these plays happening, stretching the ice out, beating those Islanders defensemen. We saw him get a very close call on the wraparound. He had a very nice pass that led to the Tomas Hertl goal here, which is the only 5-on-5 or not, that's not true. LeBanc scores the 5-on-5 goal, but this is the only 5-on-5 goal early on in this game prior to the comeback. And so generally a good game for Duclair. Granlund similarly continues to show off his playmaking prowess. While it did get punished a couple of times in this game for sure in the earlier parts of it, still something that you don't want to stamp out, and at the point of Granlund's career, that's something that he is very well aware of at this point. And so it's nice to see him have seen this general improvement, and Zetterlund also making some decent things happening. It wasn't the fantastic best game amazing like it was with Tomas Hertl for these three players on the second line, but still a pretty good game for them. When it comes to the third line here, we have LeBanc, Sturm, and Bailey, and this was actually maybe a relatively underrated line for San Jose because they looked quite good. LeBanc, for a third straight game, continues to be doing a lot of the right things here for David Quinn, and while right now it's kind of been a weird carousel of players in the bottom six because of constant injuries. For instance, this game it was Ryan Carpenter being forced to step out of the lineup due to injury. LeBanc is managing to maintain his spot in the lineup because of that, but at this point, even when players get more healthy, perhaps not when it's fully healthy, but when let's say Cunnin returns to the lineup, Labanc is not the odd man out, at least in my opinion. I would be much quicker to bench perhaps a Jacob McDonald or primarily likely a Justin Bailey than to get Labanc out. Not only does he score his first goal of the season this year or in this game, but it was just a solid performance from Labanc and also from Nico Sturm. A couple of issues. There obviously the breakaway that he gave up early in the third period. That was a very good opportunity for the Islanders and was just an issue early on in the third period in general. Nico Sturm had that moment, but offensively did some solid things for sure. The odd man out on this line, it felt, was Justin Bailey. I do think he improved as the game went on, as he ended up playing a relatively solid third period. But ever since his debut performance with the San Jose Sharks a couple of games ago, he hasn't really ever lived right up to that performance. And so, like I said, he's my odd man out when the Sharks do get a bit healthier. Once Carpenter and eventually Cunnin as well return to the lineup for San Jose, Bailey should indeed be the player who is benched in that situation. And then when it comes to the fourth line, a bit of a tale of two games for this fourth line because a couple of players stood out in a relatively positive light. I actually enjoyed Hoffman's performance here tonight. Usually Hoffman, the type of player he is, wouldn't exactly excel in a fourth line role, but he's been doing a decent and admirable job there. He's been the type of player who has just moved up and down the lineup thus far this season, and it's, decent to see him actually performing okay. Zadina returning to the lineup after a few games missed due to injury, also making some okay things happen, I guess. A lot of the times while he would get the puck, they wouldn't exactly amount to super dangerous chances, grade A opportunities for this fourth line, but at the very least he's getting those puck touches, which is relatively important, especially for fourth line, where at that point you're not exactly hoping for the offense, you're more so just hoping for the possession. The third player on this line, though, Jacob McDonald, even though he has been better in these last couple of games, scoring some goals, he felt as though he was probably the most invisible player for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. While he did get a strange overtime shift for San Jose, acting as a defenseman in that role, he otherwise didn't exactly do much in his actual position in this game, which was as the fourth line forward. So, as per usual, though I mentioned that Justin Bailey is likely the first odd man out, if both Cunnin and Carpenter do return to the lineup, McDonald is my second odd man out. And then we come to the defense. We have the top pairing of Ferraro and Burrows. And when it comes to Kyle Burrows, I've mentioned multiple times his performance always seems to be very dependent on what his partner does in the game, and the major reason for that is that Burrows primarily where he excels is in front of the net. This is where he likes to play. He likes to clear traffic from in front. When it comes to actually having to chase players around, have that good positioning, prevent passes, this is where he really falls apart, and so he usually lets his partner deal with those more difficult situations, and when his partner isn't doing it well, Burrows looks bad because of it, and when his partner is doing it well, Burrows looks good because of it. This is not a very good quality in a defenseman to have, but it's just kind of the player that Kyle Burrows is, and so it's something that the Sharks are going to have to deal with if they're going to continue playing him in the lineup. At this point, his spot in the lineup mostly just seems to exist because the Sharks have injuries on the back end, and once again, we saw another injury here tonight with Benning stepping out of the lineup, but he continues to find himself on this top pairing at least until one of those two players, Emberson or Benning, does return. When it comes to Mario Ferraro, he had a couple of issues in this game, a couple of really bad shifts where he's just failing to get pucks out of the zone, that's for sure, but like I mentioned, he doesn't get a ton of support from his defensive partner, so it's hard to fault him a ton, but it was an okay, maybe somewhat average game for Ferraro. When it comes to the second pairing, this is where the Sharks, I would say, struggled. Addison, after an extremely impressive performance in the previous game against the New York Rangers, definitely did not look nearly as good here tonight. The offensive play was pretty much non-existent, and you could tell that David Quinn was very much in tune with that criticism because Addison, who would usually find himself in a 6-on-5 situation or usually find himself in a 3-on-3 overtime situation, never really got the time of day in this game down down the stretch. And so David Quinn benches him, so to speak, in those last few minutes, and it was because he had a very bad start to this one, in particular defensively, where things did not look good. Of course, it should be noted that his defensive partner did him literally zero favors. Vlasic returns to the lineup due to the injured Matt Benning and was not good. Definitely one of the worst defensemen for the San Jose Sharks here tonight, and it's just basic, Mark Edouard Vlasic of this season and in past seasons. He's just not a good player anymore. And then when it comes to the third defensive pairing, we have Ruta and Okhotyuk. I was relatively hard on this defensive pairing in the previous game against the Rangers, and I thought they showed notable improvement here tonight, in particular Okhotyuk, who I have had much criticism of in these last few games. I thought he looked much better here tonight. Very good to see. A solid game in general from on this third defensive pairing. Also jumped up offensively, which is something that has always been a part of his game in these last few and his outings thus far this season. So that was nice to see. Ruta, not super noticeable, but as I've mentioned time and time again, as a defensive defenseman who's not exactly contributing a ton offensively, sometimes not being noticeable is a good thing, and here tonight I thought that was the case for Ruta. And then finally we have the goaltender Kaapo Kähkönen, who did a lot of very good things for the San Jose Sharks in the early parts of this game. Yes, were all of these goals amazing to give up? Not necessarily. The Nelson one he definitely could have had for sure, but besides that, he kept them alive early on, he kept them alive later on, and he gets the win for the San Jose Sharks at the end of the day, 5-4 in overtime. But that would do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday as they will continue this East Coast road trip. They are now 2-2, getting their first 2 road victories of the entire season, and we'll see if these fun ones can continue there. Class dismissed.